Everything sounds good on your end?
Sounds good. We can hear you.
Very good. Well, I want to welcome everyone to our webinar this evening. I'm Patrick Byers, horticulture field specialist with University of Missouri Extension, and I'm excited to be with you here tonight to talk about business planting. And I also want to introduce to you my colleague from Springfield Community Gardens. Anna, would you like to say a few words on behalf of the organization?
I'd like to, thank you. Hi, my name is Anna Meadows. I'm with Springfield Community Gardens, and I'll be the moderator of tonight's webinar. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them down in the chat or in the Q&A, and I'll be watching out for those so I can ask Patrick whenever those come up. Also, at the end of this webinar, there will be a little pop-up with a link to a questionnaire. These webinars are funded in part by the USDA, and so with our evaluation with them, they ask that we ask a few questions of our participants. So it just takes a couple of minutes. We'd really appreciate it if you would take the time to do those at the end.
Well, I want to thank Anna for moderating tonight and kind of keeping an eye on all the things that make for a successful Zoom. I will, again, mention the evaluation. It's very important. That feedback is necessary to help us improve from the standpoint of producing these webinars, which are a partnership between Springfield Community Gardens and University of Missouri Extension. And as Anna mentioned, they're also part of our reporting responsibilities to the USDA, who has provided the funds to help support the webinar this evening. Okay, without any further ado, let's go ahead and start the presentation. Okay, Anna, can we see the presentation?
We can see it. Looks good.
Very good. Thank you. Well, again, our webinar this evening is on business planning. And this is a very important topic for new farmers, also for farmers who have been in business and are considering changes in their farm. Business planning may not be as sexy a topic, perhaps, as some of the webinar topics we've done, but I would say that it's one of the most fundamental basic keys to success in farming. So I'm glad that you're with us here tonight. I'm glad that you have given us some of your time to share some of the practices and concepts behind successful business planning. I'm Patrick Byers. I'm a horticulture field specialist with University of Missouri Extension. And looking at this picture, I don't look particularly professional, but I show you this picture to point out that I was also for many years the owner and operator of a successful commercial peach orchard, Byers Orchard. And I'll be sprinkling some anecdotes related to our business throughout the presentation. We planted the orchard in 1991, and we ended that part of our farming enterprise in 2008. So we had a good long run of success with growing and marketing peaches. And again, I think that's helped inform me, first of all, as an extension specialist, but also as a farmer in my relationships with other farmers. And I want to point out our class resource. Tonight's workshop is based upon building a sustainable business, a guide to developing a business plan for farms and rural businesses. And we'll be talking more about this here in a moment. This is available as a free downloadable PDF. It's also available in hard copy. It was developed initially by the Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture in collaboration with the USDA Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Branch. So again, it's an excellent, excellent resource. And if you have read this book, if you have it in hand, then you'll see as we go through the material tonight that I followed the outline and the presentation style of this book quite closely, because I have seen it to be a very successful tool for helping farmers develop business plans. Tonight's workshop is a partnership with Springfield Community Gardens. Springfield Community Gardens is a grassroots organization whose vision is a community where everyone has access to healthy local food. Again, based in Springfield and Greene County, Springfield Community Gardens oversees a network of community gardens across the region. They also have a very successful beginning farmer program. And I invite anyone with an interest in becoming a farmer to reach out to the Springfield Community Gardens Farmer Incubator Project. There's a great deal of information available on the Springfield Community Gardens website and also on the Springfield Community Gardens Facebook site. And then our partner for this evening is the USDA. And the USDA has generously provided several grants that Springfield Community Gardens has been awarded to help develop farming and local food production in Southwest Missouri. And part of our responsibility for the responsible use of these funds is to acknowledge our partners. And these include several branches of the USDA, including the Farm Service Agency, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the Risk Management Agency, and others. And information on all of these agencies is found at the farmers.gov resources website. We'll be digging deeper into some of the programs and services available from several of these branches a little bit later in the program. But again, acknowledge the role that USDA has in supporting local sustainable agriculture in Missouri. Here's the outline of what I'd like to cover tonight. Now, I am going to give a caveat at this point. Developing a business plan is not something that we can do in one evening. There are so many aspects to it, so many facets, so many ramifications that need to be considered, that tonight, all we can do of necessity in our time together is present some concepts that will hopefully help guide you in developing your business plan, and also hopefully steer you towards that publication I mentioned earlier. This is an exhaustive exposure to developing a business plan. There's a number of resources available in that publication that are very helpful. But at any rate, what we're going to do this evening in our time together is, first of all, an introduction and a reality check. Then we'll talk about the process of identifying values. Then we'll talk about reviewing history and taking stock of your current situation. We'll talk about clarifying your vision, developing a mission statement, and identifying goals. And the next bullet, strategic planning and evaluation, this is actually where we'll be spending the majority of our time this evening together on this particular area. And quite frankly, this is, in my experience, one of the more enjoyable parts of business planning, because this is where you look at the different options and you look at all of the implications and the ramifications in putting together a successful farm. And then we'll finish with presenting, implementing, and monitoring your business plan. Let's start with a quote. Business planning is a critical component to any operation. Even though a seat-of-the-pants approach of farming might work, it takes too long to figure out if a decision is a poor one. You can waste years doing the wrong thing when you could have been doing the right thing. I like this quote. This is from Greg Reynolds, the owner of Riverbend Farm in Minnesota. And you can learn more about Riverbend Farm by visiting the website noted here on the slide. But again, when I talk to experienced, successful farmers, they agree with Greg. A business plan is a critical component to a successful farm. So you're interested in becoming a farmer? Well, fabulous. We need farmers. And I couldn't be more encouraging and supporting of your interest. But have you figured out how to get to where you want to go? This picture is from a recent twilight walk that we had here in Greene County. And a number of farmers joined us for the twilight walk. And the farmer who led the walk, Curtis Millsap of Millsap Farm, asked all of these people why they were interested in farming. And we got lots of interesting stories, but something that was very apparent to me is that, yes, there are lots of dreams and lots of initial thoughts on what that might look like. No one really had a clear idea of getting to that point. And that's the value, that's the beauty of a successful business plan. And that's what we'll be talking about this evening. So why is business planning important? Well, I think I kind of defined that, but let's dig a little deeper into that. There are certain points in the course of your business where a business plan is invaluable. And looking at that picture there, you see a map of Missouri. And again, I'm of the generation that still understands maps and how to unfold them and how to fold them back the proper way. I know today most folks rely upon GPS on their handheld device, but thinking about GPS or for that matter, a map, there are particular times where you can consult a business plan. First of all, if you're starting out, obviously a map can be very helpful in planning the route that you're going to take to get to your destination. And that's very valuable as you begin your trip. Secondly, as you expand or change enterprises, perhaps somewhere along the route you decide you want to visit something else. And the map is very helpful in understanding the proper interstate exchange to take to get to that point where you want to go. Adding more people to the farm. Let's say you pick up some relatives in the car on your trip and they have places they want to go. Well, let's take a look at the map and figure out how to accommodate their interests as well. In times of trouble, flat tire. Well, perhaps the map is going to help guide us as to where we can find help in times of trouble. When you need money, well, let's take a look at the map and see when the next town is that might have an ATM, or if it's during the day, perhaps a bank that we can visit to withdraw some money to help us with that particular issue. And in times of transition, we're driving along and all of a sudden we have several choices to make as far as the best route. Well, the map will help guide us in choosing the best route to get to where we want to go. And this is especially the case, for example, if the weather's looking perhaps stormy or night's coming on and we need to find a place to spend the night. So again, a business plan is very analogous to a map. All of these points are very important times in the course of your business to have that business plan in place. Again, I want to stress the value of this publication, Building a Sustainable Business. This publication takes a 5-step process to developing a business plan. And this is the process we're going to follow this evening. First of all, identifying values. Secondly, reviewing history and taking stock of your current situation. Third, clarifying your vision, developing a mission statement and identifying goals. Fourth, strategic planning and evaluation. And fifth, presenting, implementing, and monitoring your business plan. In other words, you're going to look first of all at what's important to you. Secondly, what you already have. Third, where you want to go. Fourth, what routes will you take to get to where you want to go? And fifth, the chosen route and how you mark your progress. I like this publication because it takes a whole farm approach. And again, it looks at all aspects of a successful farm. This publication includes lots of examples and case studies that you'll find very valuable, very helpful in customizing the approach to your farm. There are templates to use to fill out particular parts of the business plan. And I guarantee if you read through this book and you follow the 5-step process, you will have a business plan when you finish the book, and it'll be a viable business plan. Okay, the first point that we're going to cover, what is important to you, identifying values. All of us have values. Values, again, are the important things that guide us in life decisions. They're the standards, the beliefs, or the qualities that we identify with. Certainly, they're important in our personal lives. This is a picture of my family, and for me, family is a very important value. But they should also guide us in our business practices, in our business life as well. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about what values might look like. Again, values are standards, beliefs, or qualities that you consider worth upholding or pursuing. Now, these are important enough that you'll base your decisions upon these values. Now, over the course of a 30-plus career of serving farmers, many times I've asked them to identify their values. And here's some examples. Paying down our expenses, putting money away for the future, farming full-time, taking pride in the products that we produce, creating a place for the next generation to farm, taking time to rest, taking vacations, being able to save for downtimes, being able to save for retirement, having a surplus to share with others in need, working together as a family, helping neighbors who are farming. These are examples of values, and I hope that those of you who are on the webinar today might identify with some of these values, because these seem to be common to many of the farmers that I've had the pleasure of serving over the years. Now, seldom is a farm just one person. Frequently there is a team or a family involved, and it's important that the farm reflect the values of everyone involved. Let's take a quick look at this picture here. This picture was taken back in the early 1990s as we were planning our peach farm. And these are the people who had a leading role in Byers Orchard, which was our farm. First of all, Michelle, my wife, then Joe, my dad, and Phyllis, my mom. And yes, we do share common values, but we have values that perhaps are more important to one or the other of this team. And so part of the process of identifying values is to identify common values. Each team member should sit down and list and prioritize values. List your values and then prioritize them. And then come together. Look at that prioritized list. I suspect you're going to find a number of common values that motivate not only individuals, but motivate all of you as a team. And then you can develop team goals, farm goals, that everyone can commit to and support. It's a fun exercise, it really is. And oftentimes it opens up aspects of people that you thought you knew. You learn more about people that are close to you in your family or on your team. Okay, the next step, what have you got? And this is a point where we review history and take stock of our current situation. And let's take a closer look at what this might look like. So, from the standpoint of taking stock of your current situation, first of all, what's the history of your business? Okay, so in other words, what's the past? What's the present? Let's assess the current situation. And we'll talk about each of these points here in just a moment. But you're going to look at your marketing situation, your operations situation, your human resource situation, and your financial situation. And throughout this, you're going to be performing what's called a SWOT analysis, SWOT analysis. Now, if you're a new farmer or a prospective farmer where you don't have an existing farm, then yes, this section will be briefer, but there are still some important points to consider in this second step, which we'll talk about here in a moment. So again, now we're going to focus on what we already have. This picture here is interesting. This is a gentleman named Ken Krause. Ken has since passed, but when he was active in East Farm, he was an inspiration to me. He was a retired businessman. He approached farming very much as a business. He had a vibrant agritourism business in Kansas. And I got to know Ken when he decided to expand into pick your own fruit. And what I found interesting is that he looked at each different type of fruit as what he called a profit center. He looked at all of the aspects of each of those fruits. And we'll talk more about this when we talk about evaluating alternatives. But it was very interesting to me because he looked at his existing farm and he tried to figure out ways that he could incorporate new profit centers into that existing farm. But again, to do this successfully, he had to have a very good handle on what he currently had. So, what is the history of your business? If you're an experienced farmer or a business owner, first of all, you want to think about the different phases you've gone through in terms of marketing, operations, human resources, and finance. Okay, we'll talk more about that here in a moment too. You want to take a look at what's worked well and also what's failed, because that's going to help inform your decisions moving ahead. You also want to look at the key opportunities and challenges that you've encountered. Oftentimes, those challenges haven't gone away. They may still be there, and they may impact some of the things that you might be considering as you move ahead. And then you want to, of course, reflect on what you've learned from your experiences as a farmer. And then think about your values. Think about how those values have shaped the choices that you've made. So in other words, if you're an experienced farmer or business owner, frequently at this point, you're considering something new, a new enterprise, a new direction, a change in the way you farm. And in order to inform that decision, you clearly need to understand your past and your present. What about if you're a new farmer or a beginning farmer or a rural entrepreneur? Well, you still have experience to draw on. It may not be farming experience, but you have life experiences that you can bring into play as you plan out your future. So you're going to focus on your previous personal, economic, environmental, and community experiences. And in fact, these experiences may have triggered your desire to become a farmer. But it's important to understand what those are and to write those down. You also want to take time to look at the history of the land that you're considering farming. Now, again, if you don't have land at this point, then obviously this is going to be a brief section, but in this section, you can still consider the qualities of land that you would like to own. Think about the markets that you'd like to serve, and think about the industry that you plan to enter. Are you thinking about produce? Are you thinking about small-scale livestock? Are you thinking about beekeeping? All of these things are part of the past and the present, and they're important to consider as you go through this section of your business planning process. Okay, so the steps of looking at where you are. First of all, let's assess the current situation. And again, this is going to be different if you're a beginning farmer versus a farmer who is already farming. But you're going to assess your current situation. You're going to take a look at your marketing situation, your operations situation, your human resources, and your financial situation. So again, you're looking at a number of things from the standpoint of where you are at present. So let's take a look at each one of these here in turn. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to use the SWOT analysis procedure to take a look at each of these particular aspects of your farm. And SWOT is an acronym that stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And strengths and weaknesses, these are internal. These are issues that you deal with as a person or that you deal with as a family or a team. Opportunities and threats, these are external. These come from the outside. These are opportunities that may be in place because of where you're located or because of other activities that are happening around your farm. Threats, same thing, things that are going on. This past year, of course, 2020, I think a lot of farmers would identify with the pandemic situation as a threat. But it's been remarkable for me to see how farmers have risen to this threat and overcome this threat, again, through careful planning. So ultimately, your plans for the future should help you overcome your strengths or build on your strengths and overcome your weaknesses. Again, you're looking at yourself and you're being honest. And your plan should help you take advantage of opportunities or to ward off threats that are offered by your environment. So again, as you develop your plan, you want to keep the SWOT analysis process in mind. Again, at each step, again, you're looking at strengths and weaknesses internally, and then opportunities and threats externally. Okay, so assessing the current situation, let's take a look at the marketing situation. Looking at this picture here, it's pretty clear that this farm is focused on marketing pumpkins. You see pumpkins in lots of different forms and variations. There are some gourds as well. But you also want to think about who are the customers that this farm is serving. This farm is obviously focused on fall sales. It likely has an agritourism aspect to it. It's inviting people to come out to the farm and choose their pumpkins, and it's focusing on experience. Think about unique features. What are the unique features that distinguish our products? I have a friend, and he does a number of value-added products from the crops that he grows on his farm, and he points out that he has something that no one else has, and that's the experience of coming to his farm, seeing the crops, and buying a product made from those crops. If he were to take his product and try to sell it at a grocery store, he wouldn't have that advantage. But again, there are advantages that every farm has, unique features. Distribution, how do we distribute our products? Pricing, how do we price our products? Promotion, what are the channels that we're going to use to promote our products? And marketing and industry, how is the market changing? Again, we're looking at the present. This is pretty straightforward. We just jot down what we've done in the past and what we're doing at present. Operations situation, what physical resources are available for our business? What is our soil like? What physical buildings do we have? What are the other assets that we have in place? Production, what production systems are we using? What are we experienced at? This picture shows strawberry production. This is strawberry production using the traditional matted row system. And again, we've grown strawberries this way for well over 100 years in Southwest Missouri. We know how to do it. Farmers are doing it. There's other ways to grow strawberries, though. And so a farmer who's doing matted row, who understands strawberries under this system, may have some other aspects of strawberry production to learn as we branch into other types of strawberry systems. And then management. Again, what management systems do we have in place to support our business? And then let's turn our attention to the human resource situation. Who is our current workforce? Who's involved in the business and what roles do they play? This is my friend Curtis Millsap and his son. His son is absorbing a lot of knowledge from his dad on farming practices and understanding farmers. And at some point, he's going to become a valuable asset to this farm. Even now, he's very much involved in farming at Millsap Farm. Skills, what are the unique skills that we need for our farm? Perhaps unique management skills relative to a particular production system. What skills do we lack at present? What might hold us back from the standpoint of expanding or developing as farmers? And then change. Will our labor situation change in the near future? Will someone enter or leave the operation in the future? One of the reasons that I discontinued Byers Orchard, the peach production side of my farm, is that, quite frankly, my children grew up. Yes, they grew up in the orchard, but when they became adults, they decided that the Byers Orchard was not their future, which is just fine. And at that point, I made the decision that I was going to go in a different direction. So again, as we go through these life changes, this becomes part of assessing the current situation and planning for the future. And then the financial situation, what are our financial needs at present? What do we need as a family or as a team to support our lifestyles, our living expenses? We also want to think about how well our business has performed in the past and how strong our current financial position is. And again, here is where we're getting into accounting. And I'm the first to tell you I am not an accountant, but I have an accountant on hire that is excellent. And she does a great job when it comes to helping me plan my farming enterprises, both looking at the past and the present and planning for the future. So bring on board professionals as you need them. They're invaluable. Now, the aspects of taking a look at financial performance are basically the same tools that we use as individuals. We can adapt these to our business. And these include the income statement, in other words, knowing how the money is coming in, the cash flow statement, which helps us understand where the money is going, the balance sheet, which gives us a feel for how income compares to spending, and then finally the statement of owner's equity, or how we're doing over time from the standpoint of the value of the business. And again, if you're serious about farming, all of these are involved in your farming practices. You have to understand the financial aspects of farming to be successful, both in the short term and particularly in the long term. Now, some other things to consider from the standpoint of the financial situation is risk. And farms are exposed to risk. And every business is exposed to risk, and it can be personal risk. It could be risk to production. It could be market uncertainties, or it could be risk related to legal and regulatory uncertainties. So again, very important to consider all of these things from the standpoint of where you are, or where you've been in the past and where you are now, because these will help guide you as you make decisions moving ahead. Now, we'll talk about all of these here a little bit later in the presentation. Now, the financial environment is something that we have to take a look at too. We have to understand certainly the past and the present and try to get a feel for the future. And so we're going to be looking at things such as interest rates and the cost of borrowing money. Employment, are there people available if we need to hire people to help us in our farm? Inflation, what are the implications from inflation relative to the cost of the materials that we need to farm? And then government actions, is there anything that we can reasonably predict that might impact what we want to do relative to government actions? Okay, Anna, at this point, do we have any questions?
No questions right now.
Okay, again, as we go through this material, please enter questions into the chat, and we will tackle them as you ask them. Anna will alert me to any questions, and we'll tackle them. Okay, the next point, where do we want to go? Where do you want to go? And this is an exercise where you clarify your vision, develop a mission statement, and identify goals. Now, this, of course, is critically important for new farmers or prospective farmers, but it's also important that even farms that have an existing business plan in place regularly read that business plan and revise it as needed to reflect changes in the farm. So again, yes, the vision can be fairly static, but the mission statement may change, and certainly goals may change as well. Okay, so how do we clarify a vision, develop a mission statement, and identify goals? Well, first of all, we dream a future vision, okay? Secondly, we develop the mission statement. And third, we set and prioritize goals. I like this picture. Again, I have several pictures of my friend Curtis Millsap, and that's him in the lead there. But following Curtis is his wife. And then the other two people are interns on the farm. And it was very interesting to me. This was a meeting that I had with the four of them. And Curtis was considering some changes to his farm. And so we basically sat down and we had a visioning session. We talked about the mission of Millsap Farm, and we talked about setting and prioritizing goals. So again, very interesting exercise. Okay, so let's talk about dreaming a future vision. Here's Curtis again. And it's important to choose a time frame when you think about the future. Okay, so again, previously we've looked at the past and the present. Now we're trying to look into the future. And we're trying to envision what the future might look like for us personally, as a family, as a team, and as a farm. And it's helpful to look at timeframes. And typically the timeframes that are chosen are 1 year, 5 year, and 10 year. It can be helpful to revisit values, because values, of course, will help drive vision. It can be helpful to consider using a focus group. Here are the attendees at one of our Twilight tours, and we basically developed an impromptu focus group with these folks. And you can see the lady with her arms crossed. We asked her to talk about her vision as a farmer. She was not farming. She was thinking about what she would like to do. And we all gave input, and it was such a fun exercise. It really was. And I think it was valuable for her as well. And a focus group can be very helpful. Certainly a focus group appears, but bring in other people too to talk about what the future might look like and get their input. Okay, so once you've done that, the next step is to develop a description of the business and personal future. Again, what do we want that to look like? And that's our vision. And again, you can do this in several ways. You can write a story, you can draw a map, you can dream a little. It's a fun exercise. And please, as we go through this material, don't think of it as, oh my gosh, I've got to do this. It's going to interfere with what I really want to do. No, look at it as a complement to what you really want to do. And in fact, it becomes part of what you really want to do as farmers. And again, this dreaming of future vision is so enlightening to sit down and start putting this on paper and realize how, again, all of these dreams can come together in a concrete fashion to help guide your future. Next step is to develop that mission statement. So basically what a mission statement does is it takes your values, your current situation, and your vision and rolls them into a set of guiding principles. Okay, so the mission statement shouldn't be paragraphs long. It should be general and short, okay? I'd like to suggest a limit of 5 to 6 sentences. And I also like to suggest maintaining a positive, active voice when writing. It's always more dynamic to use the active voice. So let's see an example of a mission statement, and I'll look towards our orchard. This was the mission statement that we developed as we were planning Byers Orchard. And again, there were other aspects to our mission, but I just chose one that aligned very well with the values that my family and I have. So we are planting and managing Byers Orchard for the following reasons. First of all, to develop a project that will enable our family to work together toward a common goal. Secondly, to encourage our children to develop an interest in the natural world and in agriculture. Third, to help our children gain experience in running a farm business. And finally, to produce fruit that will make people happy. And again, this came about after a considerable amount of deliberation. This looks easy, right? But no, this actually took a number of sessions of sitting down and revisiting our values, taking a look at our vision for the future, both for our family and for our farm, and then actually putting down the mission statement. And then the final part in this step is to set and prioritize goals. So again, goals describe what you do, and they describe what you would like to achieve. And I like to look at this as the what and the who, not so much the how, because that's coming later when we talk about looking at options, but the what and the who. There are personal goals, there's family goals, there's business goals, community goals, and environmental goals. And when we think about this, think about your personal situation and think about what you'd like to accomplish and who needs to be involved. And basically, that's how goals are developed. Now, the most common timeframes, again, that are used for goals, similar to what we talked about from the standpoint of vision, a short-term horizon of 1 to 5 years, an intermediate horizon of 5 to 10 years, and a long-term horizon of 10 years or more. So again, we're looking at timeframes to help guide us in developing our goals. Now, this is a process that, as I mentioned, is a lot of fun, but it can be a bit stressful, okay, particularly when family and team are involved, because not everyone is going to have the same goals. It can be helpful to sit down and write out what these goals might look like. Okay, again, this is similar to that process of looking at values. But write out the goals, identify common goals among family members or team members, recognize the differences, and together, working collaboratively, establish a set of goals and priorities that you can all agree on. And again, looking at this picture here, you see the gentleman in front. That's a colleague of mine who is just an excellent mediator. And it can be very helpful, particularly in a family or a team setting, to bring someone in who is a disinterested party who can mediate this discussion. And again, a skilled mediator can help guide the process to a successful conclusion. So again, we see all of these people around the table. This was not an actual goal-setting exercise. It was a group of farmers that came together, but we did a mock goal-setting exercise, again, that my colleague was mediating. And it was very interesting to see how the farmers opened up when a disinterested party was guiding the discussion. So again, it can be helpful to bring on a mediator. Now, how do we prioritize goals? Well, first of all, we can take a look at resources and recognize that, yes, we can develop a list of goals. We've got to have the resources to achieve goals. And it's not a very common situation where we have enough resources to achieve all of our goals simultaneously, Okay, this is why the effort of prioritizing goals is important. So again, through prioritizing, we identify those goals that are most important to our families and our teams and to our business. And once we've identified those important goals, we prioritize those from the standpoint of allocating resources. And these resources could be money, they could be time, they could be personnel and labor. All of these things can be limiting factors to achieving all of our goals. But if we prioritize goals, then we can dedicate the resources necessary to reach those goals. And we have to recognize, though, that in some cases, achieving a particular goal may actually delay achieving another goal. But again, that's just the reality for most of us. And with limited resources in hand, let's focus on those important goals. Once we've achieved those, then we can reallocate resources towards other of our goals. Okay, Anna, do we have any questions at this point?
We don't right now.
Okay, very good. The next point, the next point of the five-part process is to take a look at the routes that you can take to get to where you want to go. And this is strategic planning. And this is where we're going to spend quite a bit of time tonight. First of all, because it's endlessly fascinating. But secondly, this is where you take a look at options and you determine the right mix of profit centers, as my friend Ken would have said, to achieve success. And again, here's another quote. There are an endless number of potential strategies. You must find the strategies that work for you. Okay, that's what this section is going to be all about. So strategic planning. Here's the process. You develop a business strategy, then you evaluate strategic alternatives because there may be more than one way to achieve a goal. We then decide on a whole farm strategic course of action. We develop contingency plans in case things don't go as originally planned. And then we develop the strategic section of our business plan. So again, this is endlessly fascinating. This is so much fun to sit down and take a look at what your future might look at. Consider options. And sometimes as you're considering options, alternative options may come to mind that you might not have considered initially. And again, you may find that you're going off in a different direction, but a very satisfying and successful direction. So here are some thoughts on what the process might look like. It's an involved task. Okay, take your time and get help. Again, as I mentioned, oftentimes there may not be, there may be options that don't immediately come to mind. But as you bounce ideas off of other people, you can have some very useful successions brought to mind. So again, get some help. No one is an expert on all aspects of strategic planning, and your team might include folks such as a banker, other farmers, extension specialists, business specialists, the staff of federal and state agencies, and the people that you intend to serve as a farmer. I like this picture, first of all, because some of my good friends are in this picture, but looking at the tall gentleman in the middle, he is the owner of an orchard. And I remember when he began his farming operation back in the late 80s, he was one of the first farmers that I worked with as a new outreach specialist in Missouri. And we worked together to plan his farm. He comes from a professional background. He understands business, but he also understands the importance of bringing in people that can offer alternative viewpoints and that can offer expertise. So don't be afraid to get help. Don't be afraid to bring some of these people that I have listed here into your planning process, your strategic planning process. Okay, let's take a look at your marketing strategy. And basically, this is how you do it. You define your customer or your target market, and then you tailor your product, your pricing, your distribution, and your promotion strategies to satisfy that target market. So taking a look at this picture here, this was a shot I took at a farmer's market. Okay, so we can look at this particular stand and we notice, well, Blue Rooster garlic. Okay, well, obviously they're selling garlic, but the fact that they're set up at a farmer's market means that they're addressing the clientele at farmer's markets. If we look a little bit closer, we're going to notice that their product is not the same thing as the garlic that you would purchase at a grocery store. First of all, it's hardneck garlic, and hardneck garlics have unique flavors and characteristics that really stand out from a more traditional garlic. So they're focused on that. They're also promoting themselves, Blue Rooster Garlic. If you look at the person behind the table there, you'll notice that she has on a shirt that highlights the farm and the farm's name. There's a banner behind them there. The tablecloth is blue as well. And they are doing lots of very interesting things to help target a particular market. And so these are the things we think about when we think about a marketing strategy. When we think about the particular market we're looking at, we want to think about who our target customers are and what do they value. So let's take a look at this stand here at a farmer's market. And notice the large banner at the top, a taste from the past. So immediately we can see that this particular farmer is targeting nostalgia. So they as we can see as we read a little bit lower, we notice that they're offering heirloom vegetables. So they're taking advantage of the interest that many of the people who come to a farmer's market have in heirloom vegetables, in the types of vegetables that you wouldn't commonly find anywhere else. They're also growing crops without using pesticides or chemicals. And that appeals to a particular group of target customers as well, and the values that those customers have. So again, here's an example of a farmer who is reaching out very effectively to a particular market. Product. What product will we offer and how is it unique? Here are some value-added products from the Ozark Fruit Company. And this is a farm in Howell County, Missouri. They grow berries and vegetables, particularly blackberries and strawberries, and they sell fresh fruit, but they've actually developed a product that is unique to their farm, and those are fruit-based syrups. So you can see they have a strawberry syrup, a blackberry syrup, and a raspberry syrup. They also have jams based upon the berries that they grow there as well. And so they've developed some products that are unique to their particular farm. And they market these products in unique outlets. You know, for example, they have several farmers markets they serve. They also serve some boutique type stores that will highlight their products. So again, they have focused on their product, they developed it, and they're capitalizing on unique aspects of that product. And again, as you look towards new enterprises in a farm, or as you look towards becoming a farmer, it's very important to consider what you're growing and recognize that, you know, in this case here, yes, they're growing blackberries, raspberries, and strawberries, but they're also growing products that are unique and that satisfy the needs of a particular group of customers. Competition. It's important to look at who else is doing similar enterprises as you plan for the future, as you think about alternative enterprises or new profit centers. Who else is doing that? And as I developed my peach orchard, that was one of the first things I looked at. You know, who else was growing peaches in my neighborhood? And yes, there were several orchards. And, you know, I went out and I met with those folks. I visited with them. I developed a relationship, first of all, because I know how important peers are. And even though they're competitors, they're also collaborators. I visited with them about the realities of marketing. I found out that in their opinions, there was room for more production of peaches in the area around Springfield. So that was heartening to hear from those people who are my competitors. And then also learning what they were doing, I helped realize how I could position myself and develop my particular business and capitalize on the things that were unique to my business compared to their businesses. So again, that's part of your marketing strategy looking into the future as well. Distribution and packaging. How and when will we move our product to market? Again, going back to my experience with Byers Orchard, we sold a farmer's market. We sent our product to market in trucks. We sent it in baskets. We didn't sell individual peaches. We didn't sell individual bulk type peaches either. We sold peaches that were already packaged, that were very convenient for customers to pick up and carry, and were very convenient for us to handle from the standpoint of selling quickly at farmer's market, which is really important. So again, you want to think about your distribution and your packaging and how that might change as you move ahead with new enterprises or as you move ahead as a beginning farmer. How are you going to set your prices? How are you going to determine a fair price from the standpoint of what you'd like to do? Well, recognize the prices are signals. They're a signal between the farmer who grows the crop and the person who purchases and consumes the crop, okay? And developing a signal that is agreeable on both sides requires some work, okay? It's important from the farmer's standpoint to understand the cost of producing a crop and also to understand what a fair profit is for the farmer who is growing that crop. From the standpoint of the consumer, it's important to develop pricing that is acceptable to the consumer. And oftentimes there are other aspects other than just price itself that impact a customer's perception of price. For example, many studies have demonstrated that customers are willing to accept higher prices for produce in a farmer's market. They're willing to accept higher prices for produce if it's grown organically. They're willing to accept higher prices for produce if they can meet the person who grew that produce. So again, these are all important aspects of setting the price. Obviously, it's important to look at who else is doing what you want to do and learn from the prices that they receive for their product. One of the first things that I did in developing Byers Orchard was to survey the prices that fresh peaches were receiving at farmers markets and other outlets in the area that I hope to serve. So again, very important to understand prices and how we arrive at prices. Promotion. How and what will we communicate with buyers or customers? And of course, this ties back to the things that we've mentioned already. What is the market we want to address? What is our product going to be? How will we work with competition, our distribution and packaging, and our pricing? But the promotion is very important because that's how we acquaint people with what we're doing. This is how we share the story of what we're doing on our farm, what we would like to do differently, or if we're new farmers, what we would hope to do as we move ahead into our experience as farmers. This picture is again from a friend of mine who is growing berries in Southwest Missouri. And he grows berries that are sold fresh market. He does pick your own, but he's also developed a line of value-added products. And he's really highlighted the unique aspects of his farm, which is Persimmon Hill Farm, both in products like sauces and syrups and jellies, but also in baked goods. And you can see that lower picture there. Boy, if you've never had a Thunder Muffin from Persimmon Hill Farm, you haven't lived. It's like a little piece of heaven, and the farm is happy to mail them to you. So again, promotion is a very important part of success as we look towards future enterprises or as we look towards the development of a new farm. Inventory and storage management. And again, perhaps this is not as exciting or interesting to think about, but it's a critically important aspect of how are we going to handle inventory? How are we going to store inventory? How are we going to maintain product quality? And again, there's my friend Curtis. Here's one aspect of his inventory and storage management. And what you see there, first of all, are standardized storage totes. All of them are the same. He knows exactly how much is in each one. And then if you notice the note that is pasted to the side of each one, this tells you what is in each tote. It tells you the date that it was harvested. And if part of it has been removed, it tells you how much is left in the tote. So Curtis doesn't have to open that tote to see what's in it, to understand when it was harvested and how much is left in that particular storage container. Very effective way to manage inventory and storage as you move product, for example, into a cooler. And again, very low tech, very easy to do. I do want to mention a strategy resource. This is the NCAT Marketing Tip Sheet series. It's available, again, as a free downloadable PDF from the ATRA NCAT website, which I have listed here. This particular tip sheet series includes information on addressing a number of marketing opportunities. For example, agritourism, pick your own, CSAs, selling at farmers markets, roadside stands, using the internet, selling to restaurants, selling to grocery stores, selling to institutions, tips for selling to aggregators or grower marketing co-ops, tips to selling to produce brokers or produce distributors or produce packing houses, and tips for selling to wholesale buyers at terminal markets. So again, this pretty much covers the spectrum of marketing opportunities for farmers. And I urge you to download this particular tip sheet series and learn from the experiences. What I like about these tip sheets is they give concrete, actual examples, case studies, if you were, to help understand how farmers have successfully used each of these marketing strategies. Okay, now let's take a look at operations strategy. Let's take a look at what we're going to be doing from the standpoint of farming to make a success of a new enterprise or to become successful as a new farmer. And a detailed operations strategy should be clear to everyone involved in the operation. This is critical. And if you have a good operations strategy, it's necessary for sound management. So again, take the effort to put together a clear and concise operations strategy. So what's in the operations strategy? Well, first of all, production management. And when we think about how production management might impact our future, this picture is a good example. So there is a newly developed management strategy for blackberries called the RCA trellis, the rotating cross-arm trellis. And you can see it illustrated in this picture here. This is an entirely new way of growing blackberries compared to the way we've traditionally grown blackberries in Missouri. It offers some huge advantages, but it also has demands from the standpoint of production management. And you have to understand clearly what those demands are before you jump headlong into growing blackberries with the RCA trellis. For example, there are more labor inputs required. There's more management inputs required. It's also a fairly expensive system to install. Even with all of these constraints, however, it can be extremely productive and it can overcome some of the risks inherent in blackberry production. But again, it's important to understand the whole picture when it comes to considering alternatives such as the RCA blackberry trellis system. And again, as we think through developments on the farm, or as we think through establishing a new farm, we want to think about what is involved in actually producing crops. Regulations and policy, what institutional requirements exist? So depending upon what you want to do, there may be some requirements that have to be satisfied. For example, in the case of Byers Orchard, I was required to get a county license to sell peaches in Webster County. And again, you can see an example down there in the lower corner. Part of my business currently is selling elderberry cuttings. And in order to sell elderberry cuttings, it's required that I be inspected by the Missouri Department of Agriculture. And so there you can see my certified nursery inspection certificate. Some farmers are subject to the Food Safety Modernization Act produce safety rule, and it's required that they go through a grower training and abide by a number of regulations related to safe production and handling practices. So again, investigate the institutional requirements that might be in place for what you plan to do. How do you find these things out? Well, you talk to people who are involved in the similar enterprises, or you talk to extension specialists, business specialists, or others who have expertise that they're happy to share with you. So what are you going to need from the standpoint of what you want to do? What are your resource needs? And, again, a good way to learn what those might be is to talk to other farmers. Developing that peer network is critically important. And I encourage everyone who is considering farming, new farmers who might be in our audience, to establish a relationship with an existing farmer. Join us for our monthly twilight walks. That's a great way to meet other farmers and to develop those relationships that can help guide you to success. And one of the things that farmers are always happy to talk about are resource needs. Looking at this picture here, this is a sprayer, okay? Prior to owning this sprayer, when I had to apply anything to my peach orchard, it had to be done by hand. It was a slow, laborious process. And then I purchased this sprayer, and it took what was an entire day process and turned it into a 2-hour process, much more efficient, much more practical. And that freed up time during my day that I could attend to other aspects of growing peaches. So as we consider future enterprises, or as we consider developing a new farm, we want to think about what our resource needs are going to be. Now, oftentimes resource needs are tied to scale. Small scale farms may be able to perform by using hand tools, for example, or using walk behind tools. But as you scale up the size of a farm, it may be necessary to look towards, for example, tractor operated equipment. And again, very important to talk with people who have experience in these areas as you develop the resource needs section of your business plan. So gaps, how will we fill physical resource gaps? Again, particularly with beginning farmers, frequently there may be resource limitations, particularly financial limitations that keep us from purchasing everything that we might need to be successful at farming. Well, why don't we look at other options? And these options might be leasing equipment, they might be borrowing equipment, they might be developing relationships with farmers where equipment is owned in common and used by a group. This is a picture here of a bed shaper. And a bed shaper is a piece of equipment, very important when needed, but it's not needed on a daily basis. So it's a very viable alternative for farmers to either hire other farmers to do their bed shaping, or to lease a bed shaper, or to purchase a bed shaper in common and share it among a group of farmers. Next, let's look to size and capacity. What scale do we want to be as farmers? How much can we produce? And obviously, this is going to have an impact from the standpoint of the financial viability of our farm, but it also impacts a number of other aspects of the farm. The labor needs, for example, the marketing opportunities. All of these become part of the consideration when we think about the size and capacity. Now, what might limit size and capacity? Well, it might be a physical limitation from the standpoint of the land resource that's available to us. It might be a limitation of labor. If there's a discrete group of people involved in that farm, there will be a point where capacity is reached, and we can't do anything else because either we don't have the energy, we don't have the time, or there's not enough hours of daylight to perform further. So it's important to understand where size and capacity fall relative to our farms. Storage and inventory management, we touched on this already, but it's important to think about how we're going to store inventory and maintain product quality. And part of this can be looking at products other than fresh or products that are sold in their freshly harvested state. In other words, taking something like blackberries and producing a blackberry product, a value-added product that will enable us to market over a longer period of time, and to take that fresh blackberry and turn it into something that has an extended shelf life. In other words, it has a way to maintain product quality. We also will think about physical facilities such as coolers that enable us to store product. And we might think about other ways of managing product, for example, freezing, drying, or otherwise preserving product so that it can be sold at a later date. Okay, do we have any questions at this point, Anna?
No questions right now.
Okay, now let's turn our attention to the human resources that are necessary for us to achieve our goals. In other words, that are important to us as we look towards the future. And again, labor and management are critical to the success of any business, but especially a farm. Farming is a labor-intensive business. Yes, we've been able to mechanize a number of aspects of farming, but there are still many, many places in farming where we need people's hands. And these challenges grow when a major change in business strategy is involved. And this is especially the case with family businesses. In many cases, family businesses begin with a model where most of the work on the farm is done by the family. But then if there's an opportunity to scale up, we may get to a point where additional people from outside of the family have to be brought into the labor pool, both as workers, but perhaps even as managers. So again, the challenges of human resources are very real. And in fact, in my time of serving farmers, I hear more frequently than almost any other limitation, it's the limitation that labor resources present. For farms who want to expand, or even for farms who want to maintain current operations, finding a suitable pool of trained labor is difficult in many situations. Okay, so when we think about human resources, first of all, our labor needs, what really do we need? Do we need people to work in fields and harvest crops? Do we need people who help us with sales? What are we going to need as we look towards the future, as we think about different trajectories for our farms, or as we think about developing a new farm? Where is our labor going to come from? What are the skills that these workers are going to need? Looking at this picture here, again, back to my experience with Byers Orchard, the gentleman in front with the ball cap on, that's my father-in-law. And I pressed him into service whenever possible because he is like very smooth, very slick, very good at marketing. And it kind of makes sense. As far as his career, it's been spent in insurance sales, and he's very effective salesman. And that translates into marketing, particularly marketing peaches at a farmer's market. So there are skill sets that are very important for different aspects of our farm. There are skill sets that are needed from the standpoint of marketing. There are skill sets that are helpful from the standpoint of promotion. There are skill sets that are needed if we look towards crop production and handling. So let's think about what skill sets might be needed as we look into the future. And let's figure out if we have access to people who have those skill sets. How are we going to fill workforce gaps? Well, this is another picture from my past in Byers Orchard, and there were a number of times as I was developing and establishing the orchard where I needed help. And for various reasons, early on, of course, my children were too young to do work such as planting peaches. And I didn't have access to some of the labor that I had later in the trajectory of my business. But in this case, I drafted into service my mom and my wife. And you can see them there. They're not particularly excited about planting peaches, but they did a great job. And so again, in a pinch, figure out where your labor is going to come from to fill gaps. There may be points, particularly for considering a new operation, where we can identify that we may have shortages, and we've got to have a plan in place to fill those gaps. Compensation. When I talk about farmers and sustainability, oftentimes one of the aspects of sustainability that farmers find most challenging is providing sustainable wages for the people that work on the farm. Certainly for themselves as family members, but also for the people that are hired to work on that farm. So again, it's very important to consider compensation and what that's going to look like. And that's particularly important with family. Again, a farm is a business. And yes, there are going to be times, particularly in the early stages of developing a farm, where what would have been normally seen as wages for family members is put back into developing the farm. But at some point, we have to think about the value of family involved in a farming enterprise. But also when we think about the people that we hire to work on our farms, what is our pay scale going to look like? How are we going to reward skill sets? How are we going to reward dedication and service to our farm? Very important things to consider. And management and communication. Who will manage the business and how? I kind of like this picture. This is what I looked like about 30 years ago, full head of hair and really skinny. But it's important to think about who is going to manage a business. And at this stage, it was pretty straightforward with Byers Orchard. I could take care of everything that was needed from the standpoint of management and communication because it was largely a family business. But as we grew in scale, then it became necessary to hire several people to help me with management. And a farmer friend of mine said that when you think about hiring people, it's important to recognize that, well, they may or they may not do as good a job as you would do, but if they do a good enough job, that is good enough. So again, think about what that looks like and recognize that there are lots of people out there who can do the good enough job. And those are the people that you want. And you'll find a few people who can do the really good job. And those are the people that you want to value and reward, particularly with compensation. Do we have any questions at this point, Anna?
No questions right now.
Okay, now let's turn our attention to financial strategy. And again, when I think about success in farming, those farms that are successful, those businesses that are successful are built around strategies that incorporate risk management, tax-efficient organization, and careful use of financing. In other words, they've done what they can to reduce their exposure to risk. They've organized themselves so that the taxes are not a burden, and they've made careful use of financing. So let's take a look at each one of these things. So risk. So let's think about what the future business environment looks like and how are we going to manage for risk. And certainly when we think about the future business environment, yes, it's things related to growing crops and what we can do to reduce risk there. But we're also looking at ways to reduce our exposure to risks, for example, related to marketing, related to the presence of people on our farms, related to the business environment and changes that we might reasonably anticipate in the business environment. So again, a good deal of success in farming is related to managing risk.
Patrick, we have a question.
Yes.
Rick asks if these documents will be available to participants.
Yes, thank you. What we will do with the presentation tonight is that I'll do a bit of editing to clean it up a bit, and then it will be posted both at the Springfield Community Gardens YouTube channel and also at the Webster County University, Missouri Extension YouTube channel. And I think everyone who has joined us tonight on the workshop registered for the workshop. And if you shared your email, then I plan to send out to everyone who registered a list of the risks and the presentation as well, so that you'll have that available. So in other words, I'll send you the presentation, all of the links, and I'll send you the link to the recorded video. Do we have any other questions, Anna?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, let's take a look at risk management from the standpoint of production and markets. So when we think about farmers managing risk, first of all, we want to look at what we're doing on the farm. And there are a number of practices that we can do to help manage risk. An irrigation system, for example, is critical in Southwest Missouri because that helps us overcome the reasonably anticipated risk of drought. Okay, we know it's going to be dry at some point during the growing season here in Southwest Missouri, and the irrigation system helps us overcome that risk. Similarly, protective structures help us overcome risk. If you look behind in this picture here, you see row covers, you see low tunnels, and you see a caterpillar tunnel. All of these are protective structures that enable us to grow crops that are not exposed to a number of environmental risks, things such as heavy rain or wind or hail or cold temperatures. Diversification is helpful. We may have a situation where we have a pest arrive that destroys part of our crop, but if we're a diversified farm, that pest may not touch the other parts of our production. And so because of diversification, we spread risk out. Value added, taking a crop and turning it into a shelf-stable product that can be marketed over time can be a very helpful way to manage risk. If you have 5 acres of blackberries and you're selling fresh fruit, you have a very narrow window in which to market a lot of fruit. But if you take that production off of those 5 acres and develop value-added products that are shelf-stable, now you have a 12-month period over which to market that product. And you also have access to markets that you might not normally have had. For example, internet-based sales or sales through the mail. Storage, having storage capacity on your farm is very important. With storage, we can take a crop that might have a 1-day market window, and by properly storing it, expand that market window to a week, to 2 weeks, or even longer. We can also take crops such as winter vegetables, as sweet potatoes and winter squash, and store them with proper conditions for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, or even longer, and spread out the marketing window that is then available to us. And we can become not only marketers of crops during the growing season, but also marketers of crops during the late fall, winter, and early spring. Another way that farmers manage risk is by transferring that risk outside of the business. For example, purchasing insurance is a very important way of managing risk. And farmers should strongly consider tools such as crop insurance, property insurance, home insurance, health insurance, and liability insurance in particular. I'm going to pause here at a moment. We've got a train coming by. Okay, in fact, let's just start that slide over. So another way that farmers manage risk is by transferring that risk outside of the business. In other words, bringing on some aspect into the business that helps with the exposure to risk. And one way to do that is by purchasing insurance. And again, it's very, very advisable for farmers to consider crop insurance when available, consider insurance to the physical aspects of the farm, the property insurance, home insurance, health insurance to protect the farmer, and liability insurance to help protect the financial resources, the financial assets of the farm. Signing production and sales contracts can be helpful. For example, if you're marketing through a grocery store or a restaurant, and you can negotiate a sales contract, then you understand clearly what is needed from the standpoint of production. You have a market already lined up. You're not exposed to the risk of not having markets in place at the point where you're growing the crop. And then consider government programs. These can be very helpful from the standpoint of risk management as well. Another way that farmers manage risk is by building internal capacity to bear risk financially into their businesses. So for example, adjusting household income in times of financial stress. In other words, adjusting your cost of living, for example, to a lower level during periods of financial risk. Diversifying income sources within and outside the farm. It's a common situation for a member of the farm team or the farm family to have outside income. Perhaps it's retirement income. Perhaps it's a job off of the farm. Perhaps it's the return on investments. But again, there can be ways that you can manage risk by diversifying income sources. It's also very important to increase liquidity whenever possible. So in other words, to hold cash that can be then available as needed to manage risks as they arise. Leasing short and long-term assets can be helpful. Again, you don't have to own a number of the assets that are needed to be successful at farming. And leasing, of course, reduces the risk that an owner would have relative to these assets. For example, if you own that bed shaper I saw earlier and you have it stored in the shed, and a tornado destroys the shed and the bed shaper, well, obviously you've been exposed to a risk. But if you don't own that bed shaper, and if in fact it's only physically present on your farm when you're using it to create beds, then you've reduced your exposure to that particular risk of damage to that piece of equipment. And then it can also be helpful to spread out asset sales and purchases from the standpoint of managing risk. Now let's talk about organization. How are we going to legally organize and structure the business? And I find it, quite frankly, scary when I talk to a farmer who does not have a legally organized business on their farm. And again, there are a number of ramifications relative to exposure to liability, relative to protecting assets, relative to the burden of taxes, and particularly relative to owning the farm and transferring that farm ownership to someone else or passing it on to another member of the family. So it's very important to consider what that organization is going to look like. Now, again, I am not a tax consultant. I am not a farm management specialist. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have the expertise to advise you on how you should go, but I can sure give you a list of people who can help with that. And I can share my personal experience for whatever that's worth. But again, it's very important that we consider the legal structure of our farm business. Again, the structure, the organization that you choose, it will have risk, finance, tax, and estate planning ramifications. And it's very important to work with a tax specialist, an accountant, or a legal advisor to get this right. And what's right for one farm may not be right for another farm. So again, you need to talk with professionals to help you understand what is right for your farm. Here's some traditional organizational structures for farm-based businesses: sole proprietorship, the partnership, various types of corporations, the B corporation, the C corporation, and the S corporation, the limited liability corporation or the LLC, the land trust, and the cooperative. And again, as I said before, there are lots of nuances to each of these organizational structures. So again, visit with someone who is experienced in what this might look like. And recognize too that if we have folks on the webinar today that are not Missouri residents, your situation may be different than it is in Missouri, because frequently there are state-based regulations and laws that govern business organization. And it's important to understand what the particular laws are that relate to the structure that you choose to use. I do want to mention an excellent resource. This is the Tips About Farm Business Structures resource from NCAT. Again, this is the same group that brought us the marketing tips series. Here's a tips series about farm business structures. And it goes through each of these particular organizations. It talks about what that structure looks like. It talks about the advantages, and it talks about some considerations that you want to think about as well. For example, if we look at sole proprietorship, the advantages, the biggest advantage is that it requires no special legal declarations or procedures. It's very informal. So if you do nothing in this regard, you're considered a sole proprietor. Now, is that a good idea? Well, maybe, but let's take a look at the considerations. First of all, because there's no legal distinction between the owner and the business, the owner is liable for everything that the business does. In other words, in the unfortunate event of litigation against your farm, all of your personal property, your home, your personal property, your assets could be vulnerable. So again, if you're organized as a sole proprietorship, quite frankly, this can be risky. So again, carefully consider what your farm structure is going to look like. And I'm not going to go into details in all of these because we just don't have enough time together tonight. But by all means, download this particular publication, take a look at it, and this will give you a good starting point when you do talk to your tax advisor, your accountant, or your legal counsel. Financing. So how are we going to finance the capital requirements that are necessary to start a new farm or to add additional enterprises to an existing farm? Where is the money going to come from? And this is endlessly fascinating as well. And as I interact with farmers and ask this question, I get lots of interesting different answers. Let's spend a little time talking about where that financing might come from. So again, the financial strategy that you develop is going to depend on a number of things. First of all, your choice of business organization, but it's also going to depend upon your values. Are you adverse to risk, for example? Are you adverse to borrowing? Do you want to have control over the finances of your farm? Or are you willing to cede some of that control to investors? Do you have a good handle on costs of financial options? For example, what might interest rates look like in one setting versus another? And are you able to make it work on paper before you start from the standpoint of the maturity of loans and when you have to pay things off? When we think about financing, certainly it's important from the standpoint of startup businesses and new farms, but it's also important from the standpoint of annual operations on a farm and long-term capital expenses. So we may need financing for any or all of these particular expenses.
Patrick, we have a question.
Yes.
Justine asks that you've talked about labor force, wages, and compensation for workers, and using existing farm models to shape one's own farm. Do any local or semi-local farms come to mind who have a sustainable model with employees who earn a full-time living wage?
Justine, that is a valid question. And many farms would say that they have not reached the level of sustainability they would like to from the standpoint of providing a living wage for the people who work on the farm. Now, from the standpoint of the owners, from the standpoint of the family, if it's a family farm, frequently the profits of the farm are part of what the family receives for working on that farm. It's not looked upon as an actual wage from the standpoint of the owners. It's looked upon part of the overall compensation for owning the farm. And that's just fine. But it doesn't work so well when you start to think about hiring people and what that is going to look like. Now, it is a challenge, quite frankly. First of all, to find labor that has the skill set needed for the oftentimes specialized jobs that need to be done on the farm. And then secondly, it can be just because of the seasonality of farm working, it may be a situation where there are not options for a farmer to bring people on full-time 12 months out of the year for a long period of time to develop a long-term relationship. In other words, farmers oftentimes rely on transient labor rather than full-time workers. Now, from the standpoint of the legal aspects of what wages must be paid, we obviously have to look towards minimum wage laws, and we have to look towards some of the other requirements that are present from the standpoint of transient labor. I don't know that I have a good answer for you as far as a farm that I would point to that is doing a good job of this. There are a number of farms that I've interacted with that have shared with me in confidence what they're doing from the standpoint of wages and return to their labor. And in some cases, I agree. They're at a situation where they are fairly recompensing their workers for the time and effort that they put into the farm. Another thing that should be pointed out, in many cases, farms make use of volunteer labor or make use of interns or apprentices, where part of the value of working on that farm is the knowledge that is gained by the worker. And that value is reflected in a lower wage that is actually paid to the intern or to the apprentice. And so that has to be recognized as well. And then in many cases, farms provide support for workers that is not in the term of a wage. It might be in terms of living arrangements. It may be in terms of produce that is supplied to the worker. There are non-wage ways that a worker can be rewarded for working on the farm. So again, a straightforward question, but a not easy question to answer. And you can note that my response was somewhat complex in nature. But I will mention that farmers have shared with me regularly that is one of the most difficult aspects of sustainability on a small scale farm. So thank you very much for that question.
Thanks for that answer, Patrick. Also, Ashley says, not a question, but this is very informative. So getting a lot of good.
Okay, let's talk some more about financing. So when we think about financing real estate, this is a really important thing to think about because oftentimes this is the largest farm expense. And for new farmers who are acquiring land, typically that's the case. Even for existing farmers, as they scale up and acquire additional land, it is a very important expense to take into account. And quite frankly, doing a good job of financing real estate can make or break the farm. So we want to carefully consider, obviously, the market price for that land. This can be a real challenge for farmers in urban or suburban settings because oftentimes the base value of that land is quite high. It can be based upon the value of the land that is close to you. We need to look at financial feasibility from the standpoint of providing income from the farm to offset the cost of purchasing that land. And then we want to think about the impact of the financial arrangements relative to cash flow. You know, if we have to tie up all of the income from a farm in servicing the loan to purchase the land that that farm is located on, there will be no money left for cash flow and for the other aspects of the farm that require the expenditure of cash. So we want to carefully consider the purchase of real estate. It has to be carefully considered. Now let's think about where the money is going to come from, okay? So traditionally with farms, the money frequently comes from internal sources. It can be from family equity, and I see this frequently when establishing small-scale farms. The family or the team is using money that is internal. It's money that has come from other sources, from savings, from investments, from inheritances, but from some internal source. It can also come from retained earnings. In other words, with existing farms, as they are expanding or developing new enterprises, rather than taking earnings and turning them into investments or some other form, these earnings are plowed back into the farm. And this is a common thing that's done too, and particularly in the early years of new farms, earnings are plowed back into developing the farm further. Money can also come from external sources. It can come from debt, and this is a frequent way to finance a farm. In other words, from borrowing money. It can come from shared ownership, where others become part of the farm. They're not active from the standpoint of farming operations and marketing, but they're silent partners. They've provided funds to help support the development of the farm. We see this frequently in the case of family farms, where there may be non-active family members who still share the mission of the farm and provide funding to help support the farm. Now, at some point, obviously, they're going to expect a return on that investment, but at least initially, they can be an important source of funding for the farm. Leasing can be an important part of providing money. And then obviously outside equity is important as well. Now let's talk about beginning farmers and financing, because financing for beginning farmers can be particularly challenging. You know, where is the money going to come from when I've got to think about things like purchasing land, purchasing equipment, developing markets, developing facilities, all of these things that are part of a successful farm. Well, here are the common sources of financing for new farmers. First of all, family or parental financing. In other words, money coming from the family. And in my experience, almost every small farm has some portion of their financing coming from the family. It can come from local banks, particularly if the beginning farmer already has a relationship with a bank. That bank may be willing to help finance the farm. And in fact, there are a number of banks that have made specialties out of financing new farms. Now, recognize one of the things they are going to expect is a viable business plan. So again, we're talking a little bit about the chicken and the egg here. You've got to have the business plan in place before you can get the financing. Local government financing, state government financing is an option as well. And if we look at this particular graphic here, this is a process that's in place to support a beginning farmer loan program that's available through the Missouri Agriculture and Small Business Development Authority Loan Program. This is a division of the Missouri Department of Agriculture. So basically, the new farmer would contact a participating lender and apply for the loan. They have to agree to the rates and the terms, and then the bank will submit this application to the Missouri Agriculture and Small Business Development Authority Loan Program. I'll just call it MASBDA, will then basically offset the cost of this loan with tax-exempt bonds that they are able to issue. And these bonds then become the backing for the loan. And the advantage to the bank is that these bonds do not have any interest payments that are due on them. The bank can invest those bonds and see a return on it. And then because this is an advantage to the bank will typically provide these loans at a lower rate that's negotiated with MASBDA. So it can be at very favorable rates, very favorable terms for beginning farmers. And then, of course, the final decision is made and the lender finalizes the loan. So this can be an important source of funding for beginning farmers here in Missouri. And for more information on that, you can check out the Missouri Beginning Farmer Loan application. There are also federal government financing options in place. In some cases, these are loans. In other cases, these are grants to offset the cost of particular aspects of the farm. Creative relationships with existing farmers can be very helpful. And then creative relationships with non-governmental organizations, nonprofits, and others who have a vested interest and expressed interest in developing small farms and developing new farmers and in developing local food systems. So again, there are a number of nonprofits, for example, that operate land banks where they have relationships with existing farmers that are looking for people that might be interested in farming land. And then they can help negotiate the relationship between the person who owns land and the person who wants to farm but doesn't have access to land. So again, there are lots of opportunities available for beginning farmers from the standpoint of financing. So let's take a look at some of these opportunities that are available at the federal level. And we're going to focus here on USDA programs. And I want to mention first the USDA Farm Services Agency Beginning Farmer and Rancher Loans. And there are several different types of beginning farmer and rancher loans. Some of them are direct loans. These are loans that FSA makes directly with the beginning farmer. Some of these are guaranteed loans where the beginning farmer negotiates the loan with a local bank and then FSA guarantees that loan. So in other words, the bank is able to make this loan at a favorable rate for the beginning farmer because the loan is guaranteed. The FSA program will provide loans for access to land and capital. So again, that issue of access to land is very important. And so this can be a good way to help finance access to land. They also provide loans for operating capital. So take a look at these programs that are available. This publication, Your Guide to FSA Farm Loans, is available at the web link that's noted here. And again, it's available in a downloadable PDF where you can read about these various beginning farmer loan programs. Another USDA program, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, has made a specialty of cost share programs. And these are programs in place to help people, to help farmers reduce soil erosion, to enhance water supplies, to improve water quality, to increase wildlife habitat, and to reduce damages caused by floods and other natural disasters. So in other words, to protect natural resources. And when we talk about a cost share program, this is typically a situation where a portion of what they call them practices. So a portion of the cost of that practice is provided by the farmer, and a portion of the cost is provided by the NRCS cost share program. And a good example, if we look at the lower picture there, we can see a high tunnel. And the NRCS has in place a high tunnel cost share program. What this program does is it offsets part of the cost of the high tunnel. In other words, it finances a portion of the cost of the high tunnel. And depending upon the various qualifiers for a farmer, this could be in the neighborhood of 60 to 70 or even more % of the cost of the high tunnel. So it can be a very helpful way to help finance portions of the farm, such as a high tunnel. There are also cost share programs in place to help offset the costs of practices such as establishing woody plantings in riparian areas to reduce soil erosion, to offset the costs of irrigation systems, to offset the costs of formation of berms, just a number of different practices that are very useful to farmers. And so I encourage you to visit the website noted here, which is the portal to the USDA NRCS program and the various projects that they have available. These programs, yes, provide actual financial assistance, but they also provide technical assistance to add to the value of the practices that are funded through the cost share programs. Another USDA agency is the Rural Development Program. And the Rural Development Program includes a number of loan programs to support farms. For example, to mention two of them, there is in place a program to support farms that are interested in developing value-added products as part of their farming operation. And there are programs in place to help offset enhancements to the energy use on farms. In other words, for example, there are programs in place that might help fund solar energy on a farm. So again, I encourage you to consider some of these programs as well. So take a look at the USDA Rural Development website for more information on those programs. And then something that is hot off the press is the publication Building Sustainable Farms, Ranches, and Communities, a guide to federal programs for sustainable agriculture, forestry, entrepreneurship, conservation, food systems, and community development. And basically, this is 101 pages packed with information on federal programs to support farmers and others that are interested in sustainability. So I urge you to download this publication and read through it. You'll likely find some ideas in there that will help guide you, and perhaps some ideas on things that you hadn't thought of before. You know, for example, looking at this picture, you see that the picture of the bumblebee in the center on the flower. There are actually programs in place to help offset the cost of establishing pollinator habitat. And the importance of pollinators on diversified specialty crop farms cannot be emphasized enough. And so there are programs in place to help offset the cost of establishing habitat to support these pollinators. So check out this publication for an exhaustive look at the programs that are available at the federal level. And again, when we think about all of these things we've talked about, marketing strategies, operations strategies, human resources strategies, and financial strategies, we don't want to look at these in an isolated setting. We want to consider these from the standpoint of the whole farm strategy. So at some point, after you've gone through each of these particular areas and you've thought about dreamed about what you'd like to be doing, it's time to put them together into a whole farm strategy and see if they're actually compatible. Because there may be things that you're considering that just flat out are not compatible, you know, because of limitations you might have relative to your land base, for example, your location from the standpoint of marketing, or the number of people who are involved in the farm from the standpoint of labor, or the money that you have available from the standpoint of financing. Now, it's important to think about the routes to get to where you want to go. We talked about the standpoint from the standpoint of, or we talked about the opportunities from the standpoint of where you'd like to go, but there may be more than one way to get there. So it's important to think about strategic alternatives. Again, don't pigeonhole yourself. Don't wear blinders as you think about this. As you talk with fellow farmers, as you talk with other people involved in agriculture, solicit thoughts on strategic alternatives. A good place to start from the standpoint of strategic alternatives is the Missouri Ag Intel website. And I have the website here listed. If we have more time, we would go into actually using this tool, but we are somewhat limited on time tonight. So I urge you to investigate the Ag Intel tool. This helps you understand your opportunities based upon local markets and where you're located, your level of expertise as a farmer, your financial position, and your available agronomic and machinery resources. All of those things we just talked about are summarized in this tool. So I urge you to take a look at this tool. You can basically go into it and look at the different types of crops you're interested in. You can look at your farm and its location and relative to other markets and its suitability for growing the crops that you're interested in. You can look at your skill set as it currently exists and assess your potential as a manager. And you can also take a look at the resources needed to produce a number of different crops. So again, I urge you to take a look at the Ag Intel tool. If you have any questions about the resource, please reach out, and I'm happy to share more information about this. Now, when we think about evaluating strategic alternatives, certainly we want to look at the long-term outlook. We want to look at how all of the alternatives might impact the long-term viability of our farm. And particularly, we're looking at profitability, liquidity, solvency, and risk. And we'll talk about each one of these. But we also want to look at the transition period outlook. You know, we've got two different options from the standpoint of moving ahead. We want to think about how they're going to impact the short term. And particularly if we're seeking financing for what we want to do, we want to think about how that financing will be impacted by the different choices that we're looking at. So we'll talk a bit about that as well. So what is profitability? Well, profitability is the net return to an enterprise. It represents returns to the operator. It also represents returns to management and returns to equity capital. Okay, it's a measure of profitability. And over the long term, we want net return to be large enough to justify using that unpaid labor. In other words, family members frequently, and equity capital. You know, maybe there's other things we could be doing with that labor and that equity capital, that it would have a better net return. So we want to make sure that what we're considering in our farming enterprise is sufficient to justify using unpaid labor and equity. And our net return, we calculate that by subtracting expenses from gross returns. Profitability. Well, when we think about the break-even analysis, this is a good way to assess profitability, to assess whether or not we've reached the break-even point. And basically, the break-even analysis will tell us the point at which revenue covers the fixed and variable costs of production. Now, again, don't leave me here. We're using some terms here that are perhaps a little bit in the abstract, but I'll give you some examples here in a moment. So again, it is important to understand the fixed and variable costs of production. So how do we find out what the fixed and variable cost of production might be for something that we're considering in the future that we haven't actually done? Well, there are a number of tools that are available to help you with that. There are enterprise budgets that are available. They've been developed by Extension. They've been developed by other government agencies. They've been developed by private consultants to help understand what the fixed and variable costs might be. And so with those tools in hand, you can develop break-even analysis based upon scenarios. And the two scenarios that are frequently used are, first of all, a fixed price. Let's say that we have a feel for what the market will bear from the standpoint of the price of a pound of blackberries, for example. Or fixed volume. Maybe we only have an acre at our disposal in which to grow those blackberries, so we know we can only produce a fixed volume of blackberries. Well, in the case of a fixed price, how much do we have to produce to reach break even? In the case of a fixed volume, what price do we need to have to reach break even for the crop that we'll produce in that fixed volume? So let's take a look at that. Now, there may be some situations where we have more flexibility, where we can look at a range of prices and a range of volumes. And in that case, it gets a bit more complicated. But I thought we might take a look at a couple of scenarios based on fixed price and fixed volume. So let's look at a situation where we're calculating break even based upon the amount of production needed to break even. So break even volume is calculated by taking overhead expenses and dividing that by the market price per unit and the direct expenses per unit. Now, when we talk about overhead expenses, this is based upon the overhead cost of producing the crop. And frequently, we're talking here about what we would consider to be indirect expenses. Again, the cost of land, the cost of an irrigation system, the cost of a tractor, the cost of implements, these sorts of things, the cost of insurance, these sorts of things that are costs, but they're not tied to a specific amount of product that we're growing. And when we talk about direct expenses, these are the expenses that are connected to a specific amount of crop that we're growing. And these might be, for example, the labor needed to harvest a pound of blackberries, the labor needed to market a pound of blackberries. It might be the cost of the fertilizer to grow a pound of blackberries. It might be the cost of the container that we harvest those blackberries into. All these things that impact the cost of producing that particular pound of blackberries. And then, of course, the market price is the market price for that particular unit. Now, if we calculate break-even value, we calculate this by knowing production volume, by knowing overhead expenses and direct expenses as well, okay? And we can think of this as the minimum market price needed to cover variable and fixed costs of production. So let's take a look at some examples of each one of these different ways of calculating break-even. So here's our scenario. Let's say we're blackberry farmers. We're investigating blackberry production, and we know that our fixed costs are about $1,365 per acre. And we base this upon an enterprise budget that the University of Kentucky has put together around blackberries. So again, we know that our overhead cost, our fixed cost, our overhead expenses is a little over $1,300 per acre. What about our variable costs? Well, we can look towards a Missouri budget that was developed recently, where we understand it takes about $1.71 per pound to grow a crop of blackberries, to grow and market a pound of blackberries. So again, with these pieces of information in hand, we can figure out what our maximum production per acre is going to be to break even at a particular, we can understand what our break-even price is at what we consider to be a reasonable production per acre. We can also take a look at what the minimum level of production needed to break even if we have a reasonable price expected. So it's fairly reasonable to expect about 6,000 pounds per acre with blackberries if we do a good job of growing those blackberries. Well, if that's the case and we run the calculations, then we need to receive at least $1.73 per pound to realize the break-even point on these blackberries. Okay, so it'd be $1.73 per pound and selling the entire 6,000 pounds per acre. Now, I will tell you at this point that $1.73 is a very low price for blackberries. The more typical price the blackberries receive here in Missouri is somewhere between $3 to $5 per pound. And so if you think about that, we can see that the profit potential for blackberries is excellent, even if we focus on the minimum price needed for break even. Well, let's take a look at a situation where our market won't bear anything more than $3 per pound for blackberries. So again, doing the calculations, we can figure out that the minimum level of production needed for break even is about 1,058 pounds per acre. Now, I will tell you that it is possible to achieve much better than 1,000 pounds per acre for even a mediocre blackberry planting. So again, we can see a profitability potential even in a blackberry planting that doesn't achieve the maximum possible yield, if we can achieve at least a $3 per pound price for our blackberries. So the bottom line is that in this scenario, blackberries look pretty darn good from the standpoint of break even and profitability. And we can run these calculations for any crop if we have a handle on what the expected fixed cost would be for those crops and the variable cost for those crops. Now let's talk a bit about liquidity. So is this strategy that we're considering going to help generate cash flow sufficient to pay back debts in a timely fashion? So again, just because something is profitable doesn't necessarily mean that it will generate cash flow, okay? And again, back to our blackberry example, blackberries are going to give us a reasonable prospect for profitability, but all of that cash is going to come within a short period of time. So again, we've got to consider what that might mean from the standpoint of debt payment. You know, is it worthwhile to borrow a lot of money to plant a blackberry planting if we might have difficulty paying back that debt in a reasonable amount of time? We also have to consider that there may be a period of time before that blackberry planting becomes profitable. In the case of blackberries, we typically don't expect full production for 3 years. And so the full potential of profit in a blackberry planting won't be realized for a number of years. And in fact, it'll probably take 3 to 4 years to pay back the investment, the initial investment in establishing that blackberry planting. So we need to think about that when we think about blackberries as one of the enterprises that we might consider. Now, as far as thinking about liquidity, we want to begin by estimating total cash flow, inflows and outflows, and we subtract outflows from inflows. And if the projected net cash flow is positive, then the plan will cash flow. It will be able to make debt payments on time. If the net cash flow is negative, then there likely are clouds on the horizon, and this particular alternative will have trouble servicing short-term debt. Now, remember I mentioned we're looking at this on a whole farm basis. And there's some cases we can afford to consider alternatives where we might not have positive liquidity, okay? If we can offset that with the situation regarding liquidity based upon other profit centers on our farm. So again, let's think about this. It may be possible to finance the early years of a blackberry planting, for example, with the income generated on other crops that we're growing on that farm.
Patrick, we have a question.
Yes.
Justin asks, for someone starting out, how should we factor in loss of crops due to insects, disease, etc. in our break-even calculations?
So when we think about break-even calculations, the thing to look at, for example, is that expected maximum production. And there are lots of places where you can find information on what you might expect, say, from a per acre return in production for tomatoes or cucumbers or blackberries or elderberries or whatever the crop might be. And that is typically an expected yield if nothing goes wrong. Well, I will tell you that every year something is going to go wrong. It's just the nature of farming. And when we think about that particular risk, we want to think carefully about how we're going to manage that risk. Let's look at blackberries for an example. And we might have a situation where blackberries might be exposed to a drought. And that obviously is going to have serious impacts on the amount of berries that we can produce and the quality of those berries. In other words, we'll see less of a yield on the blackberry planting. We can overcome that risk by putting in an irrigation system to water those blackberries. Let's think a little bit about tomatoes. So tomatoes are prone to diseases, especially if they're grown in the open field. But if you move those tomatoes into a high tunnel, you can now grow them with less exposure to diseases. And quite frankly, you can see tremendous increases in yield in growing tomatoes in a high tunnel compared to growing those same tomatoes in the field. So again, when we think about the break-even analysis, oftentimes we focus on what that expected production would be. And we calculate based upon that. And then we recognize that we as farmers have to do what we can to predict that expected yield. And yes, there are going to be years where that yield will be less, and we want to build into our break-even analysis a little bit of a cushion. And frequently that cushion is related to price. And there may be a situation where we can look at a market where we can command a higher price if we have a lower crop in a given season. And we certainly saw, for example, during COVID, we're obviously still in COVID, but in 2020, we saw a situation where a particular market may not have been available to a farmer, but by thinking creatively, farmers were able to develop markets that in the long run proved to be more than adequate to meet break even. And in fact, some cases proved to be excellent markets that they plan to maintain into the future. So again, a number of things to consider in answering that particular question, but quite frankly, it comes down to managing risk as best you can as a farmer, and then building cushion into your break-even analysis.
Great, that's all the questions right now.
Okay, let's talk a bit about solvency. Now, solvency means that your farm is building net worth. Okay, and if we're looking at new strategies, can we reasonably expect that new strategy to lead to growth in net worth? All of us should be doing a balance sheet periodically. Some people do it monthly, some people do it every 6 months, some people do it in preparation for tax time, but we should also be doing balance sheets for our farm. We should be looking at the assets of the farm. We should be looking at the liabilities of the farm at a given point in time. At least once a year, you should be doing a balance sheet on your farm. And we want to think about how those alternative plans are going to change the balance sheet. For example, is there going to be the need to devote some of the farm reserves to buy new equipment? Do we have to put up a new facility for this particular strategy that we're thinking about? Are we going to be adding something that, yes, initially will have value, but will lose value over time, like a piece of equipment? We want to think about how the new strategies that we're considering affect net worth. Because again, yes, we want to look at the short term, but we do want to build net worth over time in our business. So when we think about alternative strategies, we want to think about what those equities are going to generate in the future compared to what we're already doing or compared to other strategies that we're considering. And if the business strategy that we're thinking about doesn't return the level of profit and equity desired, or if it can't service debt, then we want to go back to our expense estimates, our output projections, and our price forecasts, those things we talked about in the break-even analysis. And we want to examine those, and we want to figure out what will lead to building net worth in time, profitability in the short term, net worth in the long term, because these should be the goals of what we're doing on the farm. And then think about risk. We may be considering a new strategy that affects the overall risks faced by our farm. For example, I've worked with farmers who have considered crops that are really only marginally adapted to production in Southwest Missouri. And, for example, I remember a farmer that was very interested in growing sweet cherries. And sweet cherries, most cultivars of sweet cherries are vulnerable to fruit cracking if the fruit is exposed to rainfall close to harvest. Well, we all know that it's going to rain in June and July when sweet cherries are close to harvest. And so it's a risky crop to consider. And in fact, putting a portion of the farm into a sweet cherry orchard actually increases the risks faced by that particular farm. Now, there are some ways to overcome that risk. Some farmers are planting sweet cherries in high tunnels to help protect them from rain. So again, this would be a way to help manage the risk that would be be developed because the farm is considering a new enterprise. And we want to think about income and cash flow under the best case scenario, but we also want to think about it under the worst case scenario. So again, some primary considerations when we think about risk: fluctuations in supply, fluctuations in market, fluctuations in prices, fluctuations in expenses, and fluctuations in interest rates. These are all things to consider when we think about how a new enterprise or a particular direction we choose to go with a new farm might affect risk. Now, I mentioned that we're obviously thinking about the long-term impact of a new enterprise or the development of a new farm, but we also want to think about the transition period evaluation as well. And it's frequent that as we take on new enterprises or as we develop a new farm, there's going to be disruption and likely even some losses. And we want to be prepared, first of all, to expect disruption and to weather those losses as we transition into a new business, a new farm, or as we transition into something new for an existing farm. Now, one of the reasons the transition period is of interest is because this is of extreme interest to lenders, because lenders, I mean, obviously they're going to take a long-term look at a loan, but they're also going to take a look at the ability of the farm to service a loan in the short term. And if we expect disruption and losses early in the life of a new farm or in the development of new management strategies, then we need to figure out ways that we can overcome that disruption or those losses to the satisfaction of the lender, or we're not going to get the loan. So that needs to be part of the process of thinking about the financing options that are available. Some financing options are going to be very strict. Others are going to be more lenient and more amenable to the situation during the transition period. So what's going to be in the transition plan? Well, it's going to include a projected cash flow plan for the specific years rather than a typical or average year. So in other words, you're going to look at the specifics of a given year. And if we go back to the blackberry example, the cash flow plan for year 1 or year 2 is definitely going to be different than a typical or average year once that blackberry planting is in full production. And so we've got to think about what those things are going to look like. We want to take a look at best estimates of short-term prices and costs instead of looking at long-term averages. For example, if we know that the long-term average of the price received for blackberries is $3.50 a pound, that's great. But if we know that we have access in the short term to a market that is looking for premium blackberries and they're willing to pay $5 a pound, but that market's only going to last for a couple of years, then we can use that estimate for a transition period evaluation. And obviously that's going to be of interest to the person who's loaning us money to establish that blackberry planting. And then finally, the transition plans are going to be affected by your current inventory of crops for sale and these other things. In other words, if you already have things on hand, particularly if you're an existing farm and you're moving into a new enterprise, the transition plan in some ways can be managed. These periods of uncertainty or even loss can be managed by current inventory or things that we're already doing. So that becomes part of the transition plan that you put together as well. Now, the final point in developing the business plan is which route will you take and how long or how will you check your progress along the way? So in other words, presenting, implementing, and monitoring your business plan. Now, I'm not going to go into detail in this. This is your take-home assignment. This is what you will develop, particularly after taking a look at that resource that I've been mentioning all along. And this is what you're going to develop. Now, I will offer myself as a person, if you want to bounce ideas off, fabulous, I'd love to do that. If you want to visit about a particular aspect of the planning process, I am happy to do that as well. Some of the most fulfilling relationships that I've developed over the years with farmers have been related to the development of their business plans. And I'd love to help you with that. And as I mentioned before, I also have available a list of other people who are more than happy to help you. So please reach out and we can gather a team together to help you with this process. So again, this is your assignment. You're going to organize your business plan. You're going to write your business plan. You're going to implement your business plan, and then you're going to monitor your business plan. And I will guarantee, I can't guarantee success for you, but I will guarantee that if you go through this exercise, you will be better prepared for success in farming, both as a new beginning farmer or as a farmer that is interested in taking on new enterprises, or new directions for your farm. I do want to mention some resources. We talked already about several resources from NCAT. NCAT and ATRA maintain a website that has a number of excellent publications and resources available. For example, there's a farm business startup checklist. There's tips about farm business structures. There's a wonderful guide on evaluating a farming enterprise. There are resources for veteran farmers, tips about farmers' income tax, basic accounting for farmers, planning for profit, and sustainable farming. All of these are available at the website noted here on this slide. And I want to thank you for joining me tonight. Again, this has been just a really exciting presentation to put together. I know when I talk about business planning, when I'm doing classes in person, sometimes eyes begin to roll and heads begin to nod, but it's my hope that as we went through this material tonight, that you realized how it applies to you in your setting. As I mentioned just now, I'm happy to work with anyone who's interested in developing a business plan. Please reach out. My contact information is listed here. And I'd love to work with you during the journey to develop the map to your success. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. Anna, do we have any questions?
Yes, one right now. It says, just curious, do you have a favorite variety of peaches or one that was best suited for Southwest Missouri?
Oh, goodness. My favorite variety of peaches is whatever I happen to be eating at the moment. But I will say that when I think about a good peach variety, you want to look towards several things. First of all, a peach variety that has winter hardy buds. Secondly, a peach variety that doesn't bloom unusually early. Third, a peach variety that has some disease resistance. There's not a lot of disease resistance among peaches, but there are some, for example, that have resistance to peach leaf curl, and that's helpful. And then you want to look towards a peach variety that has fruit that meets your quality criteria. You know, for example, do you want a yellow flesh peach, or do you want a white flesh peach? Are you happy with a cling peach, or do you want a freestone peach? Do you want an early season peach, a mid-season peach, or a late season peach? So there's a number of things to think about. If I had to pick my all-time favorite peach, if I had to choose one peach over everything else, first of all, it'd be a really hard thing to do. But I will say there is a peach cultivar called Topaz, which is just hard to beat. It has all of those criteria that I mentioned. It's a delicious peach. It's a freestone mid-season peach. But again, that's not the only peach to consider. There are a number of peaches that are just absolutely wonderful. And I'm kind of waxing poetic here, but when I think about all the pleasures of life and the pleasures of living on a farm and working on a farm, there's, you think about picking a tree ripened warm peach and biting into that peach and that gush of juice and the aroma and the flavor. It's just a wonderful experience. So there you go. That's my soapbox sermon on peaches.
Wonderful. Thank you. We have multiple thank yous from participants. So very informative. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Very good. My pleasure. I was excited to be with you here tonight. Please reach out to Springfield Community Gardens if you're considering farming. Remember those resources that I mentioned at the Springfield Community Gardens website, Springfield Community Gardens YouTube channel, and the Webster County University of Missouri Extension YouTube channel. And as I mentioned before, as soon as I get the video downloaded and edited, we will be posting it. And encourage everyone to please help us out with the evaluation link that will appear as we end the webinar. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. I want to thank Springfield Community Gardens. I want to thank Anna for moderating the session tonight, and encourage you to check out Springfield Community Gardens website for our next workshop, which is coming up, I believe, in February. All the workshops are publicized there. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a good night.